All right, welcome. I'm going to give folks a second to join us. If you saw the post on social media, that link isn't working, unfortunately. So come on over to this link, and we have a very exciting guest this evening. So please join and tag your friends. We're going to be talking about porn addiction this evening. So I'm muted. Oh, am I? You can. And now I'm unmuted.
I can hear you now.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, welcome, welcome. My name is Dr. Felicia Clark, and I'm here to help women break with body shame and live as the God they were meant to be. Tonight is our first live broadcast of Goddess Conversations. We've done these in private, and so now we're going to try this on social media. Here at Goddess Conversations, we discuss any and all things related to body shame culture and how to overcome it. And I'm so excited. Our guest this evening is Joshua Shea. He's a TEDx speaker, author of several books that we'll talk about in just a few minutes. A man who had to rebuild his life after porn addiction and other addictions made it all come crashing down. Welcome, Joshua.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Felicia. I appreciate you having me today.
I really appreciate you being here and thank you so much for discussing such a hard topic as porn addiction because I wholeheartedly agree with you. That's something we have to talk about. It's very rampant in our culture and no one wants to deal with it. So I'm glad that you're dealing with it. But before we jump right in, can you tell us a little bit about you and the work that you have as your life mission?
Yeah, my name is Joshua Shea. I was born and raised and still live in Maine. Um, I was for many, many years what people would consider a pillar of the community. They saw me as a magazine publisher. I was a local politician. I was one of the creators of a very large film festival that brought a lot of people to this part of the country. And, people would look at me and say I was on top of the world, but for a very long time, I had a couple secrets. And while people definitely knew about my alcoholism, because you can't hide that, people didn't know about my pornography addiction. I was a pornography addict for 24 years. I was an alcoholic for 22 years, probably a workaholic as well. Um, Basically, I was an overachiever, so I could hide the fact that I absolutely lived with a bunch of self loathing. I lived with a bunch of trauma. I tried to even fool myself that I didn't have it. But ultimately, in 2014, the Maine State Police showed up at my door and said, "Hey, you've been using porn and you've been in chat rooms, and one of those chat rooms you went into had an underage female in it." And I
Mm.
said, "What are you talking about?" And they laid it out for me, and I couldn't lie to them. They were telling the truth. I had been going into chat rooms, and the chat rooms were getting sexual. One of the women, unfortunately, was a underage female. For this, I was arrested. This basically brought what my life was at that point to an absolute end. When the police were at the door, I first saw them as devils who were taking my life away from me. But I'll tell you now, 8.5 years later, completely clean from pornography, completely clean from alcohol, happier, healthier than I've ever been. I now know that those men were angels at the door. For the next 2 years before I got sentenced, I first went to rehab for alcoholism, spent 10 weeks in California on that. Then a little bit later, spent 7 weeks in Texas for porn and sex addiction. Um,
Yeah.
Two of the most transformative experiences of my life. And then when it came time to serve my 6 month sentence, um, I found myself doing coaching for a lot of men in jail. They knew who I was because it was in the newspaper, this type of stuff that was happening to me. And the day that I reported to jail, there was a big story. So they knew who I was. And within a couple days, I had men coming up to me and saying things like, when I'm on the outside, I have to have sex with women, 3 or 4 different women a week, and I don't even want to do it. What's wrong with me? Or when I go to work, I have all my lunch breaks, I'm in my car watching pornography. What's going on with me? And it was the first time that I realized that, there, but for the grace of God, those were the same people I met in my rehab in Texas who had lots of money, who were lawyers and doctors. And I realized what a huge problem this was and how nobody wanted to talk about it. So when I was in jail in 2016, I wrote the draft of my very first book, which was called The Addiction Nobody Will Talk About. I thought that would be the only book that I wrote about pornography addiction. I had it published after I got out. It came out the first week of 2018. But what surprised me was that I got a ton of letters, emails, especially from wives, from girlfriends, and even some from mothers who said, "Hey, you fixed yourself from porn addiction," which I didn't really fix myself. I just went with the program. But they said, "How can I fix my guy?" Or, my guy says he doesn't have a porn addiction. He said it's because I'm not pretty enough, or I'm not good enough in bed. Is this true? Help me out here. And this was my first kind of foray into coaching or just letting people know what was going on. And I learned the phrase betrayal trauma for the first time. And I met up with a licensed marriage and family therapist. We wrote a book called "He's a Porn Addict, Now What?" which is a simple Q&A for the wives and girlfriends of male porn addicts. That book, out of all the 4 that I've written, still sells more copies than any other. And once the pandemic hit, I was doing a lot of speaking. I was going to colleges and libraries, doing different events like the TED Talk. And then when the pandemic hit, I realized if I was going to continue to make money at this and keep helping people, which I loved, I had to change gears. So I actually became a certified betrayal trauma coach. I'm also a pornography addiction coach. And I was recently certified as a therapeutic disclosure specialist, which is basically a fancy way of saying being the referee and coordinator when a husband and a wife need to share some real deep secrets and have some very serious conversation and not go off the rails with it. So I've been doing this now for the last 2 years.
I
Excuse
want to
me?
interject because you dropped a few bombs here, and there's a
Yeah,
lot
there's a lot there. That's why I wrote 4 books. There's a lot
and
there.
you're right, and I'm so glad that there's so many spin-offs that you're willing to take on, because if you won't talk about it at all, then you can't even get to how do we heal from the impact of it. And so you said a lot, and I want to go back and look at several things. But one of the things you said that intersected with my work, and that's why I was very interested in speaking with you, is that a porn addict said basically your that his girlfriend wasn't pretty enough, or she felt somehow some degree of body shame when men
Yeah.
get addicted to a fantasy. So I'd like for you to talk about not so much the women's feeling at this point, but what goes through a man's head when he's looking at, yeah, there are people, it's video, it's kind of inanimate, and you'd rather have that than a human next to you. What's going on in your mind, your body? What's the appeal?
Well, we got to understand there are two different types of people who use pornography. There are the addicts, which I fell into, and then there are the recreational users. The recreational user is strictly using pornography as some kind of sexual aid, either as a surrogate if they don't have a partner, they may pick it instead of their partner, or they may use it with their partner. However, it is, they are using it as a sexual aid. For those who are addicts, they are using it for a completely different reason. They are using it because it helps to quell the trauma. It helps to quell the anxiety, the stress, everything that's going on inside of them. You know, addiction is addiction is addiction. I
Mm-hmm.
looked at porn for the same reasons I drank, for the same reasons that for 4 years in my 20s, I smoked marijuana every day. For the same reasons that I liked going to work because I felt under control there. These
Mm-hmm.
things helped me escape who I was. So it's kind of ironic when I have a client as a coach who is a woman. I explained to her it's almost better if he's an addict because he actually isn't choosing porn over you. What he's choosing is his addiction. Because porn addiction, it's not like it takes place in your crotch, just like cocaine addiction doesn't take place in your nose. All addiction takes place in your mind. And for the addict, they really don't. And I can tell you personally, it really doesn't matter what we're looking at. We're trying to get at the chemicals in our mind. That's the dopamine, the oxytocin, the serotonin, the endorphins. These are the pleasure center chemicals. This is what we're trying to get at because this is the only way we know to live our lives is to get these chemicals firing. And people do that in all sorts of ways, whether it's video games or drugs or alcohol or food or sex, a million different things. So there we have to keep in mind there's the addicted user and then there is just the recreational user. And if the recreational user or the addicted user is claiming that their partner is just not pretty enough, just not good enough in bed, well, that's a bunch of crap. The, these guys have come into the relationship with these seeds already planted. I was a porn addict at 12 years old. When I met
Wow.
my wife at 25 years old, tell me how she could have had anything to do with it. What you get is you get men who are afraid, who I don't want to say necessarily cowards, but they're afraid and embarrassed to admit that they can't stop using. So they want to deny that they have a problem. So they look to deflect to anybody else. It's typical gaslighting. No, the problem's not
Mhm.
me. The problem is you, when it's obvious to everybody, including the addict, that the problem is the person who's using. And I do have to also add that it isn't just men. We are seeing
Yeah.
more women than ever before. And actually, we're seeing more women than men right now when it comes to the numbers that are going up as far as pornography addiction goes, because it's easily accessible to everybody now. And it turns out girls have working sex organs just like guys do, and they enjoy looking at stuff just like guys do. So I have just I have quite a few female porn addict clients, just like I have
Hmm.
males who are betrayal trauma clients whose wives have betrayed them. It's not by gender, it's all over the place these days.
And one of the things with women that doesn't get categorized as porn addiction, but it is a type of addiction. And all of those romance novels, so where men like pictures, women like words. So, Zanzibar, what's up on the beach? It's just the two of you. And then they kind of
Well,
get stimulated and then use toys. And so then
Well,
they
that's exactly
become,
it. And I tell people, what's the difference? And I always I share this story is that my wife and my daughter, several years ago when I was an addict, we're going back now 10 years, they would get Victoria's Secret catalogs in the mail. Victoria's Secret cat used to spend 10 catalogs a week. I don't know how many forests
a
Victoria's
lot.
Secret as a company have killed, but we got
Mhm.
these Victoria's Secret catalogs all the time. Now, my preference when it came to pornography was never lingerie, was never fancy models. So that didn't do anything for me. It was junk mail. It was all over our coffee table. It caused a mess. It was not sexy for me. However, when I went to rehab in Texas for pornography, one of the men who joined a few days after I did told everybody the first day, I want you to know I'm not a regular porn user. I don't care about porn movies. I don't even care about naked people. I love looking at women in lingerie. And what that shows is that, yes, we all know porn is that triple X stuff, but porn is really in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah.
Lingerie did nothing for me, but it did for him. Those books that you're talking about, if somebody is using those books, those romance novels, the same way that their, next door neighbor is using pictures, the same way that their next door neighbor beyond that is using videos, it's all the same. It's using media for sexual gratification purposes or in aiding to get to the sexual gratification. Or if you're an addict, to get at those chemicals in your brain that you're looking to get released from previous traumas.
So, even more to unpack. So this whole time you had a family,
Yeah.
and you mentioned all the long-term addictions, and I'm curious if your wife and daughter maybe paid attention to the other addictions or not.
It was very obvious. It's very obvious when you're an alcoholic. It's very obvious when you're a workaholic. It's pretty darn easy to hide when you're a porn addict. When you're an alcoholic, you slur your words, you smell. Hopefully, you call people to give you rides instead of drunk driving. When you're a workaholic, you're never home, or when you are home, you're always working. But a porn addict, I can wait for everybody to go to sleep at night, or I can wait for everybody to leave the office. Or I can wait for, everybody goes to the grocery store. It's very easy to be a porn addict and hide it. And I learned hiding from my, conservative Catholic mother how to hide all my dirty magazines in the late 80s and early 90s. So if I could learn how to hide it from my mother, it was never going to be difficult to hide it from anybody else, especially once it got onto the internet in the mid and late 90s.
So I'm curious if you started as a young boy and you're saying it's more of a dopamine rush that you're looking for. Um, how did that impact your intimacy and your overall sex life, non-intimate or intimate, or
Well, being an addict, I'm a very much a textbook addict. And Dr. Patrick Carnes, who's really like the godfather in this area of study, he had a groundbreaking study many, many years ago where he looked at American men who were sex and porn addicts. Over 70% of the men who were sex or porn addicts had trauma from physical abuse early in life, or unresolved trauma, I should say. Just over 80% had trauma from sexual abuse when they were young, and over 90% had unresolved trauma from mental and emotional abuse when they were young. For myself, at the hands of a babysitter when I was young, I stayed there when my parents were at work between the ages of about 2 and 7, 2 and 8. I experienced sexual abuse there, and I experienced a lot of mental and emotional abuse. And really, what I did was I just created a world where I could compartmentalize and function, and I created survival skills that just said survive to the next day and do what you have to do, lie, steal, cheat, do whatever it is, just survive to the next day. And once you kind of get into this trauma loop, you don't continue to develop these, skills that you need in life. And the coping skills of a 7-year-old boy cannot be the coping skills of a 22-year-old man or a 35-year-old man. Yet that's what I had. A lot of people make the mistake of thinking that, okay, well, I've worked through this trauma and I've moved on. But what happens is you discover a substance, whether it's drugs or gambling, or in my case, pornography. I was dealing with this horror, the aftermath of this horrible place where I was, abused every day for years and years. And I discovered pornography, and that made me feel in control. I think that pornography, especially, was interesting to me because of the sexual abuse that I suffered at the hands of the babysitter and her family members, and a lot of mental abuse as well, putting me into a back room. If I was bad, not knowing why, she would throw me into a back room, and I might be in pitch black for 15 minutes, might be 2 hours, might be 6 hours. I don't know. So you just learn to cope. And eventually you get through it, as I did, as I, went off to elementary school and didn't go to her anymore. But the problem is, you don't actually put this stuff away. You just wrap it up, and it eventually comes back later. And that's what happened with me when I was, 35, 36 years old. And I hit a wall where I couldn't find any pornography that did anything for me anymore. So I started to go into chat rooms. That's when I started talking with women and trying to get them to do sexual things on the computer, because just looking at a video or just looking at a picture didn't do it for me anymore. It's an escalation of the addiction, much like how with my alcohol. I got to the point where I had to stop drinking beer because I couldn't get drunk on beer anymore. I had to drink harder things. Or a gambling addict has to spend, goes from $20 a hand to $50 to 100. And you have to escalate your addiction in order to keep up dealing with the stress, dealing with the anxiety, dealing with the trauma, because you haven't resolved anything. And ultimately, addictions are just symptoms of bigger problems. And that bigger problem is more often than not trauma that has been unresolved. So while
So
I also had, while I had
I
to
want
figure
to
out
dial
through the
back
help with many people.
so we don't get on another topic,
Okay.
because you said something that I wanted us to sit with for a second. And first of all, I want to thank you again for being so candid and
Okay.
so open of things that we don't talk about. Now, I know your books are about porn addiction, but I worked in the school system in the past as a assistant principal, and so one of the trainings we have, one of the things we have to look for is children who've had all kinds of abuse, including sex abuse. And so our culture talks about it not well, but we talk about it with girls. But 1 in 7 boys has been violated as well, and we just expect to stuff that. It shows up as rage, as violence, and as you shared, alcoholism, detachment, alcoholism, many things. And so I just appreciate that you can come in and be present in your healed self and talk about it without the shame that so many men just carry for a lifetime. I My platform started with helping women get over body shame, and one of the ways to do that is to be orgasmic. A lot of women in our culture, the majority of women are non-orgasmic, and uh, we're women are expected like we are all the time, and porn is one of those things that teaches that message. But what ended up happening, I started getting a lot of men coming to my healing practice that have body shame, and they wouldn't say that, but I read their body, and I don't make them talk about what they don't want to. And I tell them I can just do energy if I feel it. I don't want to take it, but will you give it to me if I ask? And they just need to release their shame and trauma. And the reason they have to volunteer to release it, because the coping strategy to keep the wheels on the bus. You can't just take one thing and then, okay, your session's over, right? So it has to be what they're ready to release. And it is epidemic in our culture. I don't share the privacy of my clients that have not given me permission to do that. But what I can tell you is that men in their 20s and 30s are ending up with erectile dysfunction, not having sexual interest in their partner, all kinds of um, lifestyle coping things that make them feel ashamed. And what I want to say, and I appreciate, what you're saying, that it is not your fault and it is not your to carry if a woman or a man violated your body at an age. So many boys are expected to be excited that a woman transgressed boundaries that she should not have when he was way too young. It's not cute. It's not funny. It's not acceptable. And then it's almost a double violation to tell a young boy that he's supposed to look at, that you're like more manly now that you've been violated. I I, I really hope that crap in our culture. I use profanity sometimes because it's just the right word for profane things. But I'm gonna try to not right now. But I just needed to not be glossed over because you said that and then moved on, and that we do that a lot in our culture. Not saying you do, but I'm saying our culture. We're like, oh, this happened to boys. Now let's move on,
Well,
and then they just stuff it, and
I
not
can
well, and they shouldn't have to. So thank you for
and I
being talk
can
about
tell
it.
you I can tell you a very personal story was talking about trying to get that next high, get that next high. I think that I chased the sexual high that I got when I was 6 years old. I was at this babysitter's house, and her daughter, who I was 6, 7, she was 20, 21. I thought she was cool. She let me hang out with her. There was one day before she was getting ready for work, and she was changing, and she told me to turn around. And when I turned around, I kind of peeked and saw her changing by her closet, and she caught me, and she had me go over to where she was, and I thought she was going to get mad at me, but she turned around and her breasts were out, and she asked me if I'd ever seen a woman's breasts before, and I hadn't in real life to that point. And
Mm,
she then asked if I'd ever touched one, and I hadn't. And I can tell you, 6 or 7 year old me got very excited touching a, 20-year-old woman's breasts. And I got so excited in that I think that's where the porn addiction, the sex addiction
mm,
started, was right then and there when I was 6 years old, because I spent so many years not understanding first that that was abuse, because it's like it was wonderful. I loved it. I wanted it to happen again and again. I understood that sex and nudity were mixed together, and this was great. I loved this, and it took me probably 30 years to truly wrap my arms around the fact that that was sexual abuse, that messed
mhm,
with my head, that sexualized me at a young age if I wasn't already sexualized. And on top of that, she was like, "You can't tell my mother. She will kill both of us. We'll be in trouble. You can't." And it was one of these things where it was secretive. It was hush hush.
and it
And
creates
and
shame, and
and
this is
I could and I could never get that high again. That's what part of it was. I could never get that feeling that that 6-year-old kid I was had at that moment. I think that's why I gravitated towards porn so much early on, was that, oh, this is the stuff that happened in that room. So I'm interested in this. This makes me feel good. This gets
mm,
all those little chemicals that were going on in my 6-year-old head. Well, in my 12-year-old head, they were going on as well, same as my 25 or 35-year-old head. But eventually, you can't just hide these demons forever and ever. You think you've put them away, but all you've done is put them on a shelf. And then by the time you go to deal with it, you realize just how it had its little tentacles in your life all the way growing up. You talk about, I never played spin the bottle. I never went skinny dipping. I never did the, go in the closet with a girl kind of games. I ran from that stuff when I was younger. I loved porn, but the real life stuff scared the heck out of me. And
wow,
you would look at me and you would think, wow, somebody who was a porn addict was, so afraid of sexuality. When it comes to fight or flight, I flew. I flew every single time because it was just, there was a dangerous feel to it. There was a scary feel to it. And when I was able to control the pornography, that was me controlling the trauma. When these other situations would happen, it scared the hell out of me, just like it did when I was a little kid at the babysitters. And I ended up, basically, I ended up getting married. My wife and I had a very, we've got a couple kids, everything's good there. But I don't think that I had the normal sexual growth as a teenager or even a man in his early
Yeah.
20s that a lot of people do have, because I was still dealing with the trauma of what happened at that babysitter's house, which, like I said, did include not just that kind of sexual abuse, but there was other much nastier, more
Mhm.
nightmarish kind of sexual abuse where there's no question that's what it was.
Well, again, thank you again for your candor because um, years ago I had interviewed a woman named Lou who had been violated by her father, her sisters, and herself had been violated by father sexually just throughout their childhood. And one of the things that she couldn't reconcile is that it felt good to the body, but it's makes you unclear about what love's supposed to be, about what a father's supposed to be, or any
Yeah.
protector or adult in charge of you. So it doesn't even have to be a parent. Anyone with authority over you that's supposed to be teaching you and guiding you. And then there's trust issues, even trusting your body. And there's it becomes so crisscross that it doesn't make you attracted to alcohol or some people do more self-destructive thing that is self-destructive, but more extreme. So I just again I really thank you for sharing your story and for the work you're doing as your life mission. You mentioned I write for Medium as well, and that was one of the things you'd be interested in. So I want to kind of just take elements of our talk and do a story on that as well because um, I think it's one thing to talk about it, but it's another thing to read it slowly. And the difference
Right.
is, I've seen, especially men, unfortunately, that talk about their sex abuse and they hide their face. And so just you showing your face and giving your name and your city, I mean, that's freeing to a lot of men that you can be okay, that you can have a family, you can deal with your trauma in ways that make you grow and heal. So thank you for being an example
Well,
of
thank you.
that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I just kind of feel that there is nothing for me to be ashamed of when it comes to my early life of what
The
happened to
Lord's
me.
yours.
And the way that I see it is that society would not talk about this stuff because it was naked people things. We didn't want to talk about it. It's a lot like the opioid crisis. If you remember, before the pandemic, that's all politicians could talk about because they finally noticed it. But we knew that opioids were out there in the 70s and 80s. But we decided as a society that people who used heroin or people who abused prescription drugs like Vicodin, these were the gross people. These were the people from the bad part of town, the lower
Yeah.
socioeconomic people who we didn't want to deal with. And we ignored them. And what happened? It's not like it went away. It's now a world where just about
Yeah.
every single one of us has a family member or somebody
Yeah.
close to us who's had problems with opiates or opioids. And that could have been avoided if we didn't bury our head in the sand 30 years ago. We unfortunately are a reactive society, and we need to be more proactive. You mentioned the. I'll show you how bad things are. Mentioned the erectile dysfunction in some of the men you've talked to. When I
Mhm.
was 20 years old, 25 years ago, when I was 20 years old, erectile dysfunction rates were 2 to 4% in men my age when I was 20. These days, for men who are 20 years old, erectile dysfunction rates are 22 to 25%. Now, you can't
One in
tell me that our
four.
diets have changed or we've evolved. This has to
Wow.
do with high speed internet, bringing a nonstop barrage of pornography. And these kids, 15, 16, 17, who don't have girlfriends or would like girlfriends, don't see themselves as addicts. Maybe they even aren't addicts. But what they are doing is they are frying their dopamine receptors, the
Yeah.
oxytocin, serotonin, like you said, endorphins, all of that fun stuff up in the brain that's supposed to give us pleasure. By the time these guys are old enough to vote, they've destroyed that part of their brain because of pornography, because we give every 11-year-old kid the greatest porn computer ever invented in the
Wow.
smartphone
Yeah.
and say,
Yeah.
have a good day at school, son. And until we grow up and recognize that we need to talk about pornography in our society and we need to talk about the results on pornography addiction. That's where I feel my role is. I'm not anti porn. I know most people can look at porn and they're fine. And we can get into discussions about, whether it's ethical or not. But ultimately, I'm not anti porn. That would be silly. It would be like being anti alcohol. We know how poorly that worked out 100 years ago when we tried prohibition. We're never going to
Yeah.
get rid of pornography. Being curious about sexuality is absolutely normal. But we also need to understand that we're giving kids loaded guns and not teaching them how to use them. I'm not anti porn. I am pro healthy sexuality. And unfortunately, we just don't have enough parents or teachers in this world who are teaching what healthy sexuality is because, oh my God, it involves that SCX word. So we better not talk about this because we'll be looked at as perverts or, sex fiends or whatever. I am not ashamed of who I am, of who I was, of what happened to me. I just think that could 12-year-old Josh have made better choices if he thought differently? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know, but I never did cocaine. I never did heroin. I never did meth. Somebody taught me not to do those things. Maybe if I had been taught that there was a problem with pornography, I would have taken it more seriously. But nobody would talk about it because, again, it scares people. We live in a Puritan
Yeah.
society.
Yeah.
And you and I have been talking, Dr. Felicia, for half an hour now about pornography. We have not once described an explicit scene of pornography because you don't have to when you're talking about it. It doesn't have to be R rated, it doesn't have to be X rated. We need to be adults in our society and talk about this. And I think that anybody who is getting into a relationship these days, man or woman, needs to have that be in the first 2 or 3 dates something that they talk about. Do you want to have kids? Do you want to get married? What are your goals? What do you think about pornography? Because some people
I
think
agree.
it's fine, some people think it's cheating,
And
and if
shut
you
down.
don't know, you better find out early.
I just think that so many people shut down. I think it makes I talk about everything. We can do background checks on each other. Not romantic. And in our society where we're supposed to build relationships on romance, and if you don't, then you're difficult. I don't mind being difficult like that, but I agree that a lot of things should be talked about. Want to segue real quick because you mentioned the called society, and so one of the things that got me interested in researching a little more, um, my book Beauty under Beastly Standards that I'm not using traditionally, but that I've written that chapter 2 is orgasm shrugged, the sexual revolution that wasn't, and so that's the series of topics this falls under. So I work with women with body shame, so plastic surgery addiction is an issue. So one thing that was like, whoa, that really stood out to me, the number one plastic surgery is the number one porn addiction state, which happens to be Utah, the number one religion state.
Yep.
So all that crisscross applesauce going on there and mix and mash ultimately lands on men as a type of emotional shame. There's all these porn addiction community things that they do in private and that are becoming more public. Thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, please let us know. I appreciate you being here. Um, yeah, the women, it lands as body shame because they're supposed to keep their husband happy to for their livelihood. So they think, well, if I was prettier, if I had bigger breasts like the women that he stares at porn, and and that's just not it. Doesn't it just gets you further and further away from being healthy? What would you say to men conflicted that want to be spiritual men, they're religious men, they're trying, but it's not working. Their views on sex comes from their religious training. The way that they think they're supposed to perform for their wife, which actually is not what brings women to orgasm, but you see it over and over. You think that something's wrong with this actual human woman. She's not behaving like the actresses on TV. And what would you say to a man that's in that situation?
Well, what I would say is that you probably have very unrealistic ideas of what is going on with sex, very unrealistic ideas of what is going on with women. And I'll tell you that this reminds me of uh, not just in Utah, but this is happening worldwide. Since the average age that a boy sees pornography is now 11 years old, if you think of that
Yeah.
boy watching just 20 minutes of porn a day, which if you talk to 12, 13, 14-year-old boys, you'll hear they watch a lot more. But if you look at 20 minutes a
Wow.
day, by the time they're 18 years old, you're talking about thousands of hours and thousands of sexual scenes they've watched. Now imagine that guy goes off to college and as a virgin and he meets up with a girl who is interested who that decides, yes, they're going to have sex together. And what is this boy going to act like? Well, he's just watched 8,000 hours of pornography. What do you think he's going to act like? There was a study
Yeah.
not too long ago of the two largest porn sites. The researchers looked at 1,000 videos on each of these sites. 97% of these videos showed some kind of aggression towards women. Further, not and this is verbal or physical, it doesn't have to be rape, but just throwing them on a bed, calling them a nasty name, whatever it is. Now, they also talked to these women of this college age, I think it was 18 to 22, and 40% said that in consensual sexual experiences they've had, a man has acted like an aggressor. And what they
Mhm.
found is that there are many women of college age who do not want to have sex with a virgin man because they know that they're going to act like a guy they've seen in porn. But the
Wow.
reality is, if you haven't been in a normal, healthy, common sexual relationship, you think porn is real. You don't understand that it's fiction. You don't understand it's not a reality show. It's not a documentary. But so all of these women report, well, I brought this nice guy back to my room, or I went back to his room, and we were starting to make out, and we said we would have sex, and all of a sudden he shoved me on the bed because he thought that's what he was supposed to do,
Wow.
having had his brain rotted with all this porn for so many years. And this is what, and this has nothing to do with addiction. This is just what's happening to the youngest generation
Wow.
that has freedom to watch as much porn as they want, and not the kind of porn that was in Playboy magazine when I was 15 years old. We're talking about hardcore triple X pornography that these
Yeah.
kids can
But
watch, and
they're
that's what
supposed
they're
to be
emulating on
adults
screen.
to see it.
And they don't realize that's not the way it is. And that's kind of when you go back to that Utah example. We've got men who watch porn and think there's this other side of life where I guess pizza guys are getting laid all the time, and where women are just running around naked, and where threesomes and all
And
kinds of
don't need
crazy sex
foreplay.
stuff happens all the time. And that's not the reality. And that's the thing, is that porn teaches an unrealistic view of sexuality. And what I would say to these men is that you need to recognize what the realistic view of sex actually is. talk to some people like myself who have been addicts. Talk to some people who have got through to the other side, what they learned. And it's that ultimately this is fiction. If you look at, the big things that men always want, a threesome and anal sex, only about
Mhm.
1 out of 12 people ever take place in a threesome. Only about 1 out of 20 ever actually have anal sex. It doesn't happen 99% of the time like you see in porn. This is not realistic, and that's what we need people to understand ultimately,
Oh,
is that porn is not real life, and we need to start telling 11 and 12-year-old boys who are watching it, and frankly, 11 and 12-year-old girls who are watching it,
yeah.
because a lot of girls are watching it these days and are starting to get messages that, oh, I'm supposed to act this way. I'm supposed to let a man do this to me.
And I'm
Um,
supposed to have breasts this size that I'm going to go buy. And that's actually going to
yes,
reduce
and what's
her
wrong with me that I don't like being thrown around? What's
hmm
wrong with me? I don't like being called nasty names. Well, the funny thing is, I have a very big TikTok following, and some of the people who follow me are actually porn stars, and they've contacted me and said they love what I'm doing, and I've
Yeah,
talked to them, and they said, we don't have sex like that in real life. Porn
yeah,
sex on film is not real sex.
exactly.
When they go home to their boyfriends or husbands or wives or girlfriends, they're having sex just like you and I are. They're not doing it
Yeah.
like they do on screen, because that's not real. And that's a message that really needs to be delivered to people.
Now let's talk about your books. You have several. They're available on Amazon. You have a website, paddictrecovery.com, the P porn, right? And
Porn or post betrayal trauma.
post betrayal. I like it. Yeah. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the post betrayal trauma book first, because that seems like something you're really focusing on now. And there it is. So tell us
Yeah, I
about that.
am, because the thing is, I don't think there is any other addiction out there that causes as much problems on a very emotional, personal level for a
Yeah.
partner, unlike anything that has, whether it's sex addiction, whether it's porn addiction. And there are, I don't like the term sex addiction. I prefer intercourse addiction, because there are so many different kinds of sex addiction: intercourse, pornography, voyeurism, exhibitionism, and other types as well. That I prefer, just having the umbrella term of sexual, kind of like the umbrella term of drug abuse. Well, these are sexual addictions,
Yeah.
and the people with sexual addictions, I we are raised from a very young age in this society to not talk about sex, to hide it. It's a dirty
Yeah.
thing. It's a bad thing. And if the crazy thing is, you look at someone who is an intercourse addict, they could have the most beautiful wife, the most handsome husband in bed next to them, but they still need to go out and have risky sex with people
Yeah.
who you would cross the street to
Yeah.
avoid in real life. And it's not because they want to have sex, it's because they need to get at the chemicals in their head, and that's the only way they know how to do it. These chemicals are basically drugs to us.
So
That's people here. Oxytocin is the love drug.
how
Um,
did you get
it's
those hormones in check enough to start functioning well again?
Absolutely, and I think that, the scariest thing for a partner, whether it's a man or a woman, most of the time it's a woman, is to find out that the person that they have been with for years has been keeping a secret of, I watch porn, or I have a sex addiction, I have an intercourse addiction, I go out there and I do something sexually behind your back. And what that causes is such a sense of betrayal that you begin to question everything. Well, if he could lie to me for 10
Yeah.
years about
Yeah.
being a porn addict when he knows I hate pornography, what else is he lying about? Does he have a second family? Does he really go off to work every day? What is going on here? And that's where you get that big sense of betrayal. And that's a tough thing to overcome, especially if you've got a guy who is telling you he doesn't have a problem. And the problem
Mhm.
is actually you, not him. That just leaves such a mess for the poor partner to try to clean up, that I felt like it was kind of my duty not just to address porn addiction, but to address what
Yeah.
goes on for the partners. And after that first book came out, and I got so many wonderful letters and questions and
Yeah.
emails from partners and from others who were concerned, usually women, for their male partner. I just realized that the next thing I had to do at that point had to be for the partners, because they want
Yeah.
they want the sick person to get better, often more than the sick person wants themselves to
Yeah.
get better.
Yeah. Early in life, I had a relationship with the man. Was constantly looking at nude magazines and maybe other things I didn't know either. But his life was spinning out of control, and I did. I wanted him to get better. Like how I'm sure he had a sex addiction too, because the thing that I just like I'm done with dealing with is just paternity suits, um, not showing up certain places because he met some woman. I'm like
Yep.
I can't anymore. So but I did want him to be better. He was actually very kind to me. Like I was very like a shock, like, whoa, you got all this going on, you know.
Well,
But
and that's the tough part. You love them.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So talk about the women's side that you work on, like when the partners come to you and they feel all this betrayal. Like, what kind of give us an example of help that women could get from you and from some of your programs?
Well, a lot of what we do is that we look at what it is, where are they being triggered, and then we try to establish that those are mainly stories that they are telling themselves. And I can tell you, for instance, with one of my clients who does allow me to share this story, her husband was cheating on her. She didn't know it until he left, ended up marrying this new woman. And this new woman and he moved into the house that he was actually going to buy with his ex wife. And when she would go home to her new apartment, she could not get off at the exit where she would usually get off, because their new house was just off the exit and she would always have to see it. And she just got so triggered she got triggered, she said, by the exit sign, just driving on the highway. There's
Mm,
the exit sign. She couldn't get off at that exit. She would go to the next exit and then backtrack down
wow.
country roads to get to their home because she got triggered. And what we had to do was, it was a very simple technique. It's a dialectical behavioral therapy technique that people can use, called assessing the threat feelings ratio. And that was where we basically said, okay, you have very severe feelings here, but is there any real threat? Is there any threat going on? That exit sign was made by the Department of Transportation. And it's just like the same exit sign, the exit before or the exit after. The exit sign doesn't like you, it doesn't hate you, it doesn't feel pain, it doesn't feel heat or cold. It's a sign, it's a hunk of metal. And I told her,
Mhm.
what I need you to do is get out of your car the next time you're there and walk up to that sign. And if you want to, I know cars will be screaming by, but if you want to, give that sign a great big kick. Punch that
Yeah,
sign if you want to, but recognize that sign is not out to get you. You are assigning feelings to that sign that aren't actually
yeah.
there. And what I say is, imagine if I drop you into a cage with a lion. You are scared because that lion could go after you. That's the feeling. And what is the threat? Well, the threat is real. The lion could go after you. This sign on the side of the road is not going to do anything. So what we have to do is look at the triggers, look at all of those little things that are really getting them, and understand that it does take time. You do mourn. This is a
Mhm.
difficult process. But if you and people will quickly say, "Oh, just get over it." But what you have to do is, it's not get over it, but you do have to commit yourself to getting through it. and you
Yeah.
can get through it and you can be better on the other side. Because most people I have found who suffer with big betrayal trauma, it's not their first trauma. It's
Yeah.
just their latest trauma. And what you have to do is go back and find again, much like you do with addicts, find that original trauma and rectify it and deal with it and talk about it. And the thing that people have to recognize, I get so many people coming to me as clients saying, I don't have any trauma. And it's like, okay, well, trauma is not just sexual and physical. You know, it's not your Boy Scout leader, raped you, or your father came home from work and beat the crap out of you every day. It can be simple things like you were bullied when you were a kid. It
Yeah.
can be simple things like somebody very close to you died, or someone very close to you, lied to you about something very important. These are all things that cause trauma that is unresolved. And I believe we all have some kind of trauma with us. And
Yeah.
going back and working through it, I can tell you for myself, I can tell you for many men and women I've seen and many of my clients, once you go through and work it out, life opens up and becomes so much better than you ever could have imagined. I don't know if you saw my mugshot from when I was arrested.
I didn't
I wait.
see the much of the news story. I wanted to show it, but um,
Oh,
having technical issues. Someone joined us, I think, from
I
YouTube. So thank you for coming in.
I probably weighed 50 pounds more then. I looked like
Wow.
a grease ball. My skin was blotchy and gross. I was not a healthy
Wow.
person. That was 10 years ago. I mean, almost 10 years ago. I think I look younger and feel younger and healthier now than I did back then. And that's what I tell anybody who's an addict is that just please trust me. It
Resonating.
actually gets so much better.
Yeah.
Addicts are often afraid to change because they don't know what they'll be like without their addiction. And I can tell you that it is tough at first, but if you can get through it, oh my God, the rewards are just so tremendous.
So I want to ask you something. You owned a magazine. You led a film festival. Trained women for modeling class, intro to professional modeling, and I did it just because I've been a model and asked to train some people say this class that people can take online. And so I don't like to talk a lot about the predatory side. I just teach you steer this way, and you're going to kind of avoid, the major predators in the industry. But then there's magazine owners that you don't see coming. I'm wondering at that time when you own the magazine, you're positioning yourself to be around actresses and models. Uh, was there anything predatory going on there?
No, there wasn't because one of my big issues was lack of control. And when it comes to pornography, when it came to the work, I was all about having control in my life and control of things. And I it's funny because we had women in bathing suits at shoots. I didn't even notice them because we had work to do. I wanted to create the best magazine. These women could have been running around naked, making out with each other, and I wouldn't have noticed them because I
Well,
was so
I'm glad.
laser focused on wanting to do the work and getting the work done. That was another addiction for me. And okay, these are great looking women who are I don't know them and they don't know me and I don't care about them. I am just using them to put a piece of my magazine together and they have to be in bathing suits and they're fine with it. Okay, that's fine. I hired a stylist, I hired a photographer. I've got, whoever's doing sometimes it was me who was the editor of a piece, sometimes it was somebody else. We talked about it and no, it wasn't predatory at all because I
Good.
was
I'm glad
so
because
focused on having
there
that
are
control of what was
there are those
happening that
photographers um,
yeah, and the
that
thing
kind of
also is
position themselves like that and encourage you, like, oh, don't you want to take that off? Don't you want to be more comfortable in
yeah.
less clothes?
I,
And they kind
I
of
know there are those
encourage.
sketchy guys out there, but
I'm
my
glad
magazine
you weren't one of them.
yeah, my
I
magazine
like
didn't
that.
do those kinds of photos.
Yeah.
So if there any photographer had done that, I would have been super upset at them for that.
Good.
Um, I ran a very professional ship because I could have control. And I'll give you a funny example is that I ran the magazine. I don't mind saying was a $3 million per year company. That one magazine that we're
Wow.
talking about, and I always made payroll. I always paid our bills, but at home, trying to run my finances at home, I would tell my wife, "How is it that we overdraw our bank account? How is it that we bounce a check or two every month? Yet I can run this $3 million company." It's because at home I had to share power with my wife, and
Mm,
communication wasn't always perfect. When I was at the magazine office, the buck stopped with me. I ran everything, so I ran a very tight ship because that was me being very controlling. And whether you
wow.
were in a bikini or you were in a wedding dress or you were in whatever we needed you to be in for any of those shoots that we did, I didn't care. I had to put that magazine out. That was my power. That was my control. You were just a pawn in my game. Like I said, it
Wow.
was survival. It was day to
Yeah.
day survival.
Yeah.
Put on the wedding dress, put on the bikini, stand over there, get your picture taken by this guy, get your hair done up by this lady, and and then here's your check. Thank you. Get out of here. I don't need you
And
anymore. That's what it
even
was.
that, making that money when you're in survival mode, that's another story there. Well,
Yeah.
listen, Joshua, thank you so much. We are coming up on an hour. My wonderful guest today, TEDx speaker, author Joshua Shea, PAddictRecovery.com. My platform speaks mostly to women. Talked about resources for women, but we got to talk about resources for men as well. Since you just dropped so many bombshells here, if any man is listening to that, I think you're a wonderful example. If he's experienced the things that you've experienced and just kind of stuff him, you're a wonderful example of how to deal with it, in little ways and big ways. So, what are some resources that men who suffer the trauma of violations to their body, of even being locked in a room, like you said, that's happened
Yeah.
a lot. Boys are rambunctious, and they also often have female babysitters being set in the dark and being trained. All of that is traumatic, in addition to having their body touch in ways, or visually seeing things they shouldn't at that
Yeah.
age. What are some recommendations and
Well,
resources
I
for
always say it's best to find two people to talk to. One is somebody who's been through it and survived and is better. And the second person to talk to is somebody who is an expert in the area who can kind of tell you where you are and create a baseline. You find the person who got through it. They can give you the personal side of things. They can be there for personal support. You find that person who's the expert, the therapist, the coach, the counselor. That person has dealt with many, many people and has probably seen where you are, what you're going through, and can tell you what has worked as far as treatment goes for other people in the past. If you are hell bent on doing this yourself, you can go to 12-step groups. There are several for sexual different things: Sex Addicts Anonymous, Sexaholics Anonymous, Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous. You mentioned the Harlequin romance books. You'll
yeah.
find some of those people in Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous because they're usually love addicts. Those people who unfortunately have that. There are online forums, bulletin boards. There's a million coaches out there, a million therapists out there. You can go to a rehab. There are now books out there. There are now, uh, I'm on TikTok every day putting a new video out there, giving tips and
Okay.
techniques to people. The information is out there if you want it, unlike 10 years ago where it really wasn't. So, there's no excuse to not learn about where you are, how you're doing, figure it out where you are as far as being an addict or just being somebody who maybe has a bit of an obsession and wants to take care of it before they become an addict. There's no excuse to not get help these days because there are so many different modalities of it.
So, which one of your books is best for men to start with, if they're just
I would tell
something you said spoke
I
to
tell
them
men
and they
and
want
women who are porn addicts to read my latest book, which is called I am reading this book about porn addiction for a friend.
to? I love that title. And again,
That one is for anybody who thinks they may have a porn addiction. It is not for a person who's been an addict for five or somebody who's been in recovery for 5 or 6 years. It's
mhm,
for the person who's asking themselves, "Do I have a problem? And if I do, what should I do?" That's what that book is for. That's for anybody who's an addict. And like I said earlier, the book, He's a Porn Addict, Now What? That's the
no,
best
for
book for
women.
the partner of a porn addict who's
Okay.
dealing with the betrayal trauma.
Are some of your other books more suited for someone who relapsed? Because during the pandemic shutdown, a lot of people with addictive behaviors started back on that path.
Well,
The
it's
loneliness,
funny you mentioned that.
isolation, and many other things, job loss. So,
The
which of your books would be best?
the book that I wrote between the two of those was actually called Porn in the Pandemic. And because I was a journalist for so many years, I recognized immediately that there was
Oh,
going to be a huge upsurge in online porn because all of a sudden we were all stuck at home, and
yeah.
not just stuck at home. And the biggest thing to come out of the pandemic is going to be the world of do it yourself porn. That's the
Mm,
OnlyFans, that's the cam sites, that's all of these different where you can now make porn in the comfort of your own bedroom and sell it. You don't have to be a stripper, you don't have to go be a porn actress out in California. You can make porn in your own bedroom now and sell it to people. That to me is going to be the biggest fallout of the
mm,
pandemic in the long term. Yes, a lot of people watched, but so many more people actually started making pornography of themselves to sell. That's the part that scares me the most about the
mm.
long term ramifications of the pandemic.
Well, Joshua, thank you so much. This is Joshua Shea, our wonderful guest TEDx speaker, author. Check out his books on Amazon.com. Go to his website, recovery.com. Sign for his email list. You'll see wonderful resources there. Again, I can't thank you enough. I know that you've helped someone this evening. You've helped me. You've touched more people. Thank you for the work that you do. Do you have one last part comment you'd like to share before we sign off?
Yeah, if you are questioning if you have a problem, you probably do. And
Okay.
I say this because how often do you ask yourself if you're addicted to vacuuming? How often do you ask yourself if you're addicted to riding on fire trucks? You don't, because you're not. If you ask yourself, "Hey, do I have a problem with this?" The answer is probably yes. Go get some help. And the other thing is, when it comes to porn addiction, there is no stereotypical porn addict. Don't think that you are immune. I have met people from the age of 13 years old straight up to early 80s, men, women, rich people, poor people, smart people, stupid people, every color of the rainbow, every religion out there. There is no immunity from porn addiction. Anybody can become a porn addict.
Well, thank you again, Joshua Shea. Check him out, paddictrecovery.com. This is Dr. Felicia Clark with Goddess Conversation, and this is one of the in the series, The Sexual Revolution That Wasn't. Remember, it's your body. Choose peace. All right, thank you.